Good. Well, good morning. I'm Jim Petrosky, president and co-founder of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. We're so glad to have you here today. Today, we have a special seminar to discuss our recent NIDS Research Insight titled Peace Through Strength, Renewing America's Nuclear Deterrent. And during this presentation, you'll hear from and be able to interact with the authors. Before we begin, I want to alert you to our upcoming seminars. On December 19th, join us for Strategic Perspective on Nuclear Modernization with Dave Hoagland, Acting Deputy Administrator for the Defense Programs at the Department of Energy. On January 30th, we welcome Stephen Blank and Mark Schneider for an in-depth analysis of Russia's current and projected nuclear posture and strategic forces developments. This seminar examines Moscow's long-term modernization and expansion efforts, and I think you'll find it to be a really exciting seminar. And if you'd like to explore more of our work, including upcoming events, publications, reports, and podcasts, please visit thinkdeterrence.com. We're constantly adding new speakers and content, and be sure to check back often and follow us on social media to stay informed. If you or your colleagues would like to receive future invitations directly from us, just email our Director of Operations, who's not here today, and I'm covering for her, Kimberly Charrington, at kcharrington@thinkdeterrence.com, and we will get you on our invite list. So throughout today's presentation, I encourage you to submit your questions using the chat or the question and answer button at the top of your screen. We'll address them during the dedicated question and answer portion of the seminar. Now, I'm delighted to introduce our host for today's discussion, our Mr. Peter Husey, President and Senior Director of Strategic Deterrence Studies at Geostrategic Analysis and Senior Fellow here at NIDS. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jim. We have three wonderful speakers today. It is NIDS's nuclear posture review that we're going to be talking about. Kirk Fansher is a senior fellow at the National Institute of Deterrence Studies. He has 30 years of experience and expertise in defense strategy and national security. He has a master's in national security studies from the U.S. Naval War College, and he has an MBA from Yale. On the other hand, we have Curtis McGiffin, who is our visiting professor of the School of Defense and Strategic Studies at Missouri State University. He's also vice president and our co-founder of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies and president of Claxon Consulting Incorporated. Our third speaker is our president, Jim Petrosky, who is the co-founder of the National NIDS, the National Institute of Deterrence Studies. His work primarily includes looking at the importance of strategic and nuclear deterrence through effective research and education and consulting. He's responsible for organizing this organization, and he has 20 years as a graduate faculty member at a number of research institutes, and he brings a long-range technical perspective to this business. He's going to be introducing our first speakers and also speaking himself. Jim, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Peter. And again, thank you everyone for joining us. So I want to frame what we're doing right now because it's important to know why we wrote this proposal. And so let me get started here. I'm sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once. Here we go. So at NIDS, our mission is clear: to bring awareness to the enduring value of sound nuclear policy and a critical role of deterrence in safeguarding national and global security. As a nonprofit think tank, we're dedicated to providing rigorous national security analysis, policy solutions, and deterrence education. And our work is driven by a commitment to peace through strength, advocating for the responsible application of America's nuclear deterrent. And so we have a unique expertise among us. You're going to hear from some of them today. And this proposal is not just an academic study. It's the result of collaboration among practitioners and policy experts with over 850 years of combined experience in the nuclear deterrence enterprise. We've been there, we've done that. And our contributors and endorsers represent a broad spectrum of expertise, ensuring that our recommendations are both practical, forward-looking, and sound. So why did we write it? Well, the world has changed, and it's changed dramatically since the last nuclear posture review. The security environment is now defined by unprecedented strategic competition. the rapid expansion of nuclear arsenals by adversaries, the erosion of arms control agreements, the previous administration's policies, while well-intentioned, are now outdated and insufficient to address today's threats. And when I say previous administrations, I'm saying both the Biden and the previous Trump administrations. As the proposal states, failing to produce a new NPR at what one would call Trump speed would burden the president with the remnants of a poorly constructed 2022 nuclear posture review and a legacy of ineffective policies embedded in government directives that require adjustment, replacement, or removal. So that's why we did this. And so our goal with this proposed NPR is to provide a decisive course correction to restore the credibility of U.S. nuclear deterrence, to modernize our force posture, and ensure that America and its allies remain secure in an era of multipolar nuclear threats. We believe that a robust, credible, and adaptable nuclear deterrent is essential not only for preventing war, but for maintaining peace and stability in a rapidly changing world. So today, we invite you to engage with us, to ask questions, and to challenge the assumptions. I will place a link to the article in the chat as well if you haven't read it yet. And if you have, please indicate with a thumbs up to give us an idea of how many have done so. So thank you for being a part of this vital conversation. And now I'll turn it over to Curtis McGiffin, Vice President for Education and the primary author of this document. Curtis, off to you.
Thanks, Jim. I'm not going to say that I'm the primary author. Kirk and I pretty much handled this together, but thank you all for being here this morning, and thanks for giving me a few minutes to sort of introduce what we did here and maybe sort of give you some of the philosophies behind it. So I got some prepared remarks. So if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, I will sort of review and go over these prepared remarks. So in 1994, the Department of Defense's definition of deterrence emphasized not just the cost-benefit logic, but also the creation of a state of mind shaped by fear of credible, unacceptable consequences. Building on that foundation, the NIDS proposed 2026 NPR starts with the fundamental strategic truth. Only credible power that is both trusted by allies and feared by adversaries can sustain deterrence in tomorrow's rapidly intensifying and coercive security landscape. Such credible nuclear power is the most reliable barrier against great power war or some lower level nuclear conflict. Its philosophy begins with a realist understanding of international politics. Adversaries are deterred not by optimistic assumptions, asymmetric treaty aspirations, or declaratory restraint, but by the unmistakable capability, demonstrated resolve of the United States to amass and impose unacceptable costs at every level of escalation. This peace through strength ethos rejects the idea that stability can be achieved by limiting U.S. nuclear options or reducing the role of nuclear weapons. Instead, it argues that lasting stability rests on the United States, the good guys, possessing a modern, flexible, and survivable nuclear deterrent that can meet the geopolitical challenges posed by China, Russia, and other emerging nuclear competitors collectively. Doctrinally, the proposed NPR emphasizes credible, flexible, and enduring deterrence tailored to a multipolar, collaboratively adversarial nuclear environment. It acknowledges that the United States now faces two peer nuclear powers, China and Russia, whose force structures, regional strategies, and escalation concepts differ from those of the United States and the rules-based international order it supports. But they are not so different from each other. This geopolitical reality requires the United States to maintain a posture capable of simultaneously deterring multiple adversaries across both strategic and regional domains, as recommended by the 2023 Strategic Posture Commission report. The doctrine therefore emphasizes maintaining the full nuclear triad at all times, ensuring a diversified mix of warhead yields and delivery systems, and preserving the ability to respond proportionally to limited nuclear use, particularly in Europe and the Indo-Pacific. By sustaining options at every rung of the escalation ladder, the proposed NPR seeks to deny adversaries any perceived gap in U.S. capabilities that could be exploited through limited or regional nuclear coercion. Equally central to the doctrine is the doctrine of escalation management. The proposed NPR argues that deterrence is not simply about preventing nuclear use, but about shaping adversary decision-making throughout crises. This requires credible regional nuclear options, resilient nuclear command and control systems, and a clear willingness to respond decisively if deterrence fails. The document rejects nuclear minimalization, sole purpose, and no first-use policies because they could undermine deterrence by signaling self-imposed constraints that adversaries may view as weak and exploitable. Instead, the NPR favors a posture of maximum nuclear deterrence that warns adversaries and reassures allies of U.S. resolve, resilience, and timely responses, including before detonation confirmation. Although this NPR calls for stronger, more credible nuclear deterrence across the board, it stops short of advocating nuclear arsenal dominance, coercive first strike interventionism, or a massive parallel conventional arms buildup. It calls for the adoption of a more assertive, resilient, and survivable nuclear posture, not a superior one, but one that no adversary or adversaries can consider vulnerable to a disarming first strike attack or susceptible to national or nuclear blackmail. The proposed NPR offers three grand messages. First, it seeks to reestablish the credibility of U.S. nuclear deterrence as directed by the Secretary of War in the face of rapid structural shifts in the global nuclear balance. China, of course, is moving towards a significantly expanded triad-based arsenal. Russia continues to emphasize limited nuclear first-use concepts in its strategies, and North Korea is demonstrating a growing capability and doctrinal clarity. Together, these trends erode the deterrence assumptions of the post-Cold War era. The NPR, therefore, argues that credibility must be rebuilt through the force posture, readiness, and an unambiguous ability to respond decisively to any nuclear coercion or attack. Second, it seeks to reinforce nuclear assurance for U.S. allies, particularly in Europe and the Indo-Pacific, by demonstrating that the United States has the capability, capacity, and resolve to extend its nuclear deterrent, whether in 2027, 2035, or beyond. The document's discussion is shared regional deterrence is central to alliance stability and empowerment. It prevents allied proliferation by giving partners confidence that U.S. guarantees are real, durable, and inseparable. If the United States fails to uphold credible extended deterrence, it does not merely risk allied hedging, it effectively invites allied nuclearization, undermining proliferation efforts and eroding U.S. leadership. Third, the NPR provides a roadmap for preserving the legacy arsenal while expanding and uploading forces as necessary to strengthen deterrence in the near and mid-term. This includes maintaining aging systems long enough to bridge modernization timelines and delays, as well as ensuring surge capacity where required and closing gaps created by simultaneous adversary expansion. Beyond immediate force adjustments, the NPR also offers guidance on developing additional capabilities and capacity outside the existing modernization program of record. Its goal is long-term resilience, a force-sized, structured, and postured to meet a future in which nuclear competition is continuous, dynamic, treaty-free, and technologically accelerated. I will remind you that the 2023 Strategic Posture Commission found that the current U.S. strategic posture won't meet future defense objectives due to the rapid threat escalation, especially the nuclear threats from two peer adversaries, and that urgent, significant change is required in the U.S. overall strategic nuclear posture. This NIDS proposed NPR identifies several bold and achievable remedies. Taken together, these messages position the proposed NPR as a blueprint for restoring credible, feared, and reliable U.S. nuclear power. Before I close, allow me a moment to comment on the connection of this NPR to the just released National Security Strategy. Obviously published weeks ahead of the 2025 National Security Strategy, the NIDS proposed 2026 Nuclear Posture Review gives substance to the NSS's intent, capturing its spirit even where the text is yet to follow. At its core is a familiar axiom: peace rests on strength. While the NSS provides some high-level direction on sovereignty, deterrence, modernization, and great power rivalry, the NIDS NPR converts these themes into specific nuclear strategy, force posture, and doctrinal framework aligned with America's global responsibilities and the President's America First agenda. First, the proposed NPR advances the NSS's core idea of peace through strength, asserting credible military power and the fear it projects as the best safeguard against conflict amid geopolitical turbulence and great power competition. The NSS clearly states on page 3, quote, "We want the world's most robust, credible, and modern nuclear deterrent," unquote. This NPR aims to deliver. It recommends force structure upgrades to ensure nuclear abundancy and survivability, including modernizing the nuclear triad and rejecting minimal deterrence limits. This NPR emphasizes the U.S. strength must be real, demonstrated, and unmistakable for deterrence to succeed. Next, the NSS emphasizes that deterrence depends on maintaining U.S. military overmatch. This strong, modernized nuclear posture advocated in our 2026 NPR directly supports that objective. The 2025 NSS also stresses economic vitality, one of President Trump's central goals. And that requires sustained focus on deterrence to prevent war in the Indo-Pacific. By creating the strategic space for economic expansion, successful deterrence enables investment in the very capabilities that sustain it. This dynamic not only offers a long-term sustainment pathway for the nuclear deterrent force, but also reinforces deterrence as the essential buffer between competition and conflict. And finally, the proposed NPR provides the nuclear force modernization agenda required by the 2025 NSS's broader national power renewal effort. The NSS states, quote, "In the long term, maintaining American economic and technological preeminence is the surest way to deter and prevent a large-scale military conflict," close quote. The 2026 NPR calls for the revitalization of the nuclear industrial base to develop new nuclear capabilities, convert existing systems where appropriate, expand investment and acquisition priorities, and rebuild the nuclear deterrence workforce. Again, the 2025 NSS declares a desire to recruit, train, equip, and field the world's most powerful, lethal, and technologically advanced military to protect our interests and deter wars. Ultimately, the NIDS proposed 2026 NPR offers a clear and unapologetic blueprint for restoring the credible nuclear power needed to decisively deter in a world shaped by two nuclear peer adversaries and a growing number of regional challengers. It recognizes the fundamental truth: long reflected in U.S. strategy and reaffirmed in the 2025 NSS, that peace rests on strength, not wishful thinking or self-imposed limits. By maintaining a modern, flexible, and resilient triad, denying adversaries any exploitable gaps in escalation, reinforcing extended deterrence to prevent allied nuclearization, and rebuilding the industrial and human capital foundations of the enterprise, the NPR meets the moment with a strategy that matches the threat. Its message is clear. The United States must remain a nation whose power allies trust, adversaries fear, and that is fully capable of averting the conflicts others might try to impose this decade and the next. Thank you very much. Over to you, Kirk.
Hello. Well, first, thank you, Peter, for hosting. Jim and Curtis, thank you for allowing me to kind of jumpstart this effort and collaborate on it. For a little bit of background, I bring a lens shaped in the 2010 NPR and the New START treaty, where I worked on the Air Force force structure and some of the consequences of the New START negotiation. So I'm going to approach this from the standpoint of what did we get right, what did we get wrong, and what does that mean for our strategy today and going forward. And I'd say that in hindsight, there's certainly two lessons to be learned from what we did wrong in the 2010 NPR. And primarily, my view is that we created a force structure and a posture that's very much ill-suited to the world at that time and as it exists currently. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our strategic deterrence forces and what needs to be done with regards to those, and then talk about regional shared deterrence and why that is central, an essential shift in our required strategy. So as we stand today, we deter all nuclear threats using our strategic deterrence capabilities, primarily CONUS-based. We have a force that is sized against Russian strategic nuclear forces and ignores the Chinese breakout and the fact that our adversaries maintain about a 50-50 split between their strategic forces and their regional forces. So we deter 10% of the problem with 90% of our forces in the strategic forces, and ignore the fact that regional escalation is the principal risk of nuclear use. Our adversaries are postured for regional escalation, and their doctrine reflects their ability and willingness to fight at a regional level on the battlefield with nuclear weapons. Okay, so the first thing I'll address is our strategic deterrent. With the emergence of China in particular, but even sans China, we've developed a posture that is overly reliant on our sea-based deterrent as our source of a second strike capability. Our sea-based deterrent is robust, it's very effective, but we need to be able to hedge against technological development. And by putting so many eggs in that basket, we've incentivized our adversaries to invest heavily to counter that capability. We've drawn down our bomber force and our ICBM forces, and one could argue that our bomber force is not really focused on the nuclear mission to the degree that it should be, in large part because the bomber force is just too small. So as far as recommendations for the other two legs of the triad, I would endorse the Strategic Posture Commission's suggestion that we need to look at road mobile deployment of the Sentinel system, which could effectively be based out of WSAs at bomber bases, building the basket a little bit bigger that way. But the most cost-effective and immediate opportunity to change our force posture is by leveraging the flexibility of the bomber force, expanding its alert capability, expanding its ability to disperse and do alert at bases other than our very limited number of bomber bases, basically rebuilding the way that we did alert early in the nuclear era, the 1957s, where we dispersed our bomber force around the world with the ability to put up to a half of the bombers on alert at a given time. This is not to say that we need to have the bombers on alert 24/7, but we need to demonstrate the ability to both disperse the bomber force and ratchet up its posture, and we need to practice doing it for that to be credible and effective. The second leg of the problem is the mismatch with the regional threat. Regional deterrence through strategic means lacks credibility. It brings up the question, would we trade Seattle for Seoul or Boston for Berlin? It's caused friction and credibility on our with our allies and with adversaries alike. So we need to address that by having a credible regional deterrent. From my experience in wargaming scenarios, the worst problem that you can face is a mismatch in terms of asymmetry of capabilities and perceptions. What I mean by this is in a scenario where an adversary might use a small battlefield nuclear weapon, let's say in an EMP attack against US forces or US territory such as Guam, we need to have an ability to replicate that attack in our response. Instead, the United States has postured itself to rely on conventional response, which creates two problems, giving us the worst of both. By going down the escalatory ladder and responding with conventional weapons, we look weak. Our resolve is questioned. In order to offset that, we normally go, at least in war games, up the escalatory ladder in terms of target selection, perhaps a C2 node in the sovereign territory of an adversary. So on one hand, we're escalating. On the other hand, we're looking weak, and we create uncertainty amongst the adversaries, and we see escalation spin out of control. Another part of that resolution, in order to have a more credible deterrent, we have to bring our allies more robustly into the solution set. That means replicating and enhancing burden sharing as we do it in NATO in the Pacific. One of the things that I would like to see happen is the inclusion of B-21s into AUKUS, which would give us a forward presence in the theaters without driving a large deployment bill. The fielding of long-range strike in a SLCM-N surface launch cruise missile configuration, compatible with SSGNs, with attack submarines, with surface vessels, or even ground deployment, is a cost-effective option. Deploying that with allied countries is also an option we need to explore, basically replicating the DCA mission across a mini triad in each region. Doing this not only shows resolve in the regions and provides a capability that matches more closely the threat, but it adds the credibility of our allies having skin in the game and having a vote on whether or not the U.S. will deploy nuclear weapons in support of our commitments to our allies. So I look forward to the comment section and the question and answering. And Peter, I'll turn it back to you at that point.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Yeah, we've got some questions here that I'm definitely interested in responding to. I'm going to highlight Curtis and I. So thanks, Peter, and thanks everyone for for putting questions in here. Again, add more as you see. We have a first question from Dave Trachtenberg. Thanks, Dave. Nice seeing you again. Yeah, and thanks for your congratulations on his report. His opening question is why did we not address nuclear testing question given relevance to nuclear deterrence and effectiveness of U.S. Nuclear stockpile? So first of all, I'll start out in the discussion because nuclear testing is sort of a sweet spot of mine as well. I know nuclear testing has gotten into the vernacular very quickly with President Trump's declaration of, well, we're going to return to nuclear testing, and you've seen a lot of documents talking about what that means and how that would go about. So I'm gonna put a different spin on this, Dave, at least from our perspective. And the way this was written and how I read this, because when I say modernization, to me, modernization is testing. We have to test when we modernize, when we develop new nuclear weapons. As you know, we do science-based testing, and I've been involved in that for many, many years with the national labs in looking at testing and evaluation. And so everywhere, I think 65 or so times throughout this document, we mention modernization. What does that entail? Well, it entails evaluation, upgrading, reassessing the strategic imperative of the adversary, looking at the threat space, looking at our capabilities, and then modernizing that to do that. And you can't do that without any kind of testing. Now, if we talk about explosive testing, to be honest, I never really, when I was reading through this, never thought that would be put on the table. And you'll probably hear differences of opinion, even among the folks at NIDS, as well as I know some of the people on this seminar that would say we shouldn't do nuclear testing unless it's a last resort. We should start explosive testing right away as a signal. I understand those viewpoints, but I believe from a testing standpoint, all modernization involves the testing, evaluation, and the critical evaluation of our systems in a new strategic environment. It's imperative we do it. And we address that in the NPR, or the proposed NPR here. And so that's my opening salvo regarding testing. Then I think there's more to be said about that. In fact, I think, Peter, we're going to be doing some more discussions and panel discussions about evaluation and testing in 2026. So I want to turn it over to the NPR, this proposed authors, to make any other comments.
Yeah, I'll add. It's simply, I think, an issue of time. The NPR was published in early November, which is right about the time that the president put out the guidance, and so it was simply just the report had already been written, and so we did not address testing. And to Jim's point, that might have been one of the things we didn't even consider on the list of things to do. I think if we were to go back and maybe do an amendment to this NPR in 2026, actual calendar year 2026, we could possibly add some language on that. Although I'm not convinced we here at NIDS have come to a settled position on this. So that would be, I think it would be more difficult even than advocating for a larger nuclear force. So hopefully that answers probably not what you wanted, David, but it's the one I have.
Let me, if I may jump in here with Kirk and Curtis. Senator Cotton addressed this issue after having spoken to the head of the CIA. And he said, in his view, the evidence is that Russia and China have engaged in, call it sub-kiloton or whatever testing, which was
subcritical,
below the threshold where we would be able to fully understand, well, that was an explosion. And there are those some who say, oh, we can tell them if they're doing something. On the other hand, there are those who think, no, we don't necessarily be able to. But if you look at the work done by Jim Howe down in Alabama, the Russians have developed an extraordinary number of new nuclear weapon types, which are battlefield type weapons. That I was talking earlier with Kirk about this, is that Yeltsin said in 1999, develop me low yield, very powerful, very accurate battlefield nuclear weapons. And my assumption is Mr. Putin wrote it and Mr. Yeltsin put his name on it because he was president, but they've implemented that April 1999 requirements. So the question I'm asking Curtis and Kirk is, are the Russians and Chinese engaging in testing? Because the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty does not have a definition of what the threshold is, below which it'd be okay, but above which is forbidden. We never were able to get that nailed down. So I'm curious, because I have to say I haven't decided one way or the other about testing, though I wanted to explore the issue, which is why I've put together some events on this subject. So Curtis, why don't you start to it by addressing that, and then we can go to Kirk.
All right. Thanks, Peter, for the question. I would, I know that in 2019, General Ashey, who was then the commander of the Defense Intelligence Agency, made a presentation noting, declaring that the Russians and likely the Chinese were already testing. That was 5-6 years ago. So this isn't a surprise. My guess is that the president's edict that came out in early November is likely because he's privy to intelligence that none of us are. I think what bothers me more is what we're not being told is just as American citizens. If there's a demand for testing, why, right? I get it. If we're going to do it equally, then that assumes that there's already testing going on, but yet we're not getting the full picture, and so that I think is likely what's driving this. I think what's interesting, at least from my perspective, Jim's always interested in the engineering side of this and the scientific, and God bless him. I'm only interested in the effect side. How useful is it for deterrence? Is it stabilizing or destabilizing? Should we do that? And there are many arguments that are on both sides that are equally interesting, and so. I always tend to lean to doing more rather than less, but I'm unsettled on what would be the effect. On one hand, some have said, well, maybe the world would benefit from a reminder of seeing what a mushroom cloud would be. I mean, the states could all come together in agreement to say we are going to do a demonstration just to remind everybody just what this power is. That's an absurd example of what that could be. But I think the idea that states will test only because the United States is testing is, I think, the fundamental question. And there's been plenty of studies that already sort of lay out the idea that states don't necessarily react to what we do. They tend to do what's in their national interests. This may be one of these examples that might be counter to that because there has been some relative delay, if you will, or an ability to conform to this national global taboo, if you will. So we'll see. But I think there is little ability, I think, for this NPR to address testing and keep the document at 50 pages. Over to you, Kirk.
Yeah, it's an interesting experiment, mind experiment, thinking through this, but I'm not sure it really matters. Okay, I look at, kind of go back to what Curtis said about modernization. I am convinced that the Russians and the Chinese are doing everything they need to do to field modern weapons. If they feel they need to do testing, I'm sure they're doing it. If they feel that they can assure from an engineering standpoint without doing testing, I'm sure that they're doing that. If they're having the North Koreans do testing for them, also a possibility. But I am totally convinced that both Xi and Putin are doing everything they need to do to try and get a leg up on the United States. And the question is whether or not we can detect it. I'm a little bit alarmed that, the Chinese put 350 silos out there and people don't think they've got the missiles and the warheads to put in them. that we cling to what, in my belief, is a fantasy of 500 Chinese warheads with the potential to go to 1,000 by 2030, when simple math would tell you the number is probably closer to 3,000 already. Now, some people will find that alarming, but I would rather bet on the worst case scenario and be wrong than bet on the best case scenario and be wrong.
Yeah, no. Peter, you gonna? So I was going to follow up.
I was going to lay out one of the questions we had from the chat. And
go ahead.
This is from Ian Harris. He says, in regard to testing, evaluation, and sustainment, do you see a need to increase capability of the nuclear enterprise assurance and securing offshore supply chains to ensure allies that weapons will work and can be delivered as advertised?
Yes.
Why don't you try go with that, Curtis?
Yes.
Okay.
I think. I think the key here is that I think it goes without saying there shouldn't be any element in the nuclear enterprise sustainment logistics chain that comes from a foreign power, much less an adversarial power. I mean, that's just got to stop. Fundamentally, it's counter to deterrence, much less national security writ large, if that is even an issue. I think the challenge, Dennis Healy, the Healy theorem said it only takes 5% of your effort to deter an adversary, but 95% of your effort to assure an ally. I don't think we do 95% of our effort to assure our allies. We just all live on faith and hope, and sort of this pat on the head that it'll all be okay, because many of our seniors don't really believe that this is even that nuclear. The use of a nuclear weapon in a conflict is thinkable even by the adversary, and I'm just not convinced that is the reality of the future. It is the reality today, but whether or not that is the reality of the future, and that's what deterrence is all about, is arming to prevent a possible future. And if we don't embrace that axiom, that sort of three-dimensional thought, if you will, it's very hard to assure allies if you don't show them that you're willing to invest. And I think what this NPR lays out is a clear signal to allies that we are investing, that we are building capacity, and then at the same time, we are empowering them to assume responsibility for the national security, not only of their own, but in the partnership of us. Others call that burden sharing. I prefer a more positive term, which is empowering, right? They're not vassal states of us. We should be empowering them through whatever weapons capabilities that they're comfortable and willing to amass, and that we're, of course, comfortable and willing to allow them to have. If our goal is to ensure that America is going to be the preeminent power in the West, right, the only country with a nuclear bomber force and a nuclear ICBM force, then we darn well better invest in it, and we better have enough. And you need to convince them, the allies, that we have enough, and that's why that 95% matters. And when you just look at the DIA public intel, the little graphic they put out in early May of this year, it says that the Chinese will have 700 ICBMs by 2035. Plus you add in the 360 some odd that the Russians already have. And then you look at the modernization program of record, that's recapitalization. We add nothing new. So we'll be at a 60% deficit-ish in 10 years. Many out there say, well, that's okay. We can live with that. We disagree, and that's what this NPR is about. Go ahead, Kirk.
Yeah, I'm going to contradict Curtis here a little bit, okay? I don't think we assure
How dare you?
I don't think we assure our allies at all. I mean, I kind of coined a phrase during 2010 that deterrence assurance is a continuum of coercion. On one side is positive coercion, and at the far end, it's negative coercion. So we're using sticks and carrots. Well, my comment on that is too often we hit our allies with the carrot. So, I mean, let's be frank here. When we took TLAM-N out of the inventory, allies in the Pacific were not happy, and we coerced them into shutting up.
Mm-hmm.
It's as simple as that. They didn't really get a vote. Okay, we told them this is what we're going to do to assure you be good with it. And it's not necessarily what they want to be assured. So, I think we've got, and this goes across administrations. This is not something that only the Trump administration is good at. The Obama administration did the same thing. When allies disagreed, be it Israel or Japan, disagreed with U.S. policy and where we were driving the train on nuclear disarmament, we told them to shut up and color.
Well, let me add to that. In 2023 or 24, whichever one the year, I'm sorry, it's all blurring together. During the Biden administration, when there was a real push in South Korea to demand their own organic nuclear capability, President Yoon at the time, after the Washington Declaration came out and sort of this new sort of, again, a comforting of our ally, came out and basically said publicly that South Korea cannot afford to pursue its own nuclear weapons because it cannot afford the pariah status and the economic sanctions that its own allies would impose on it.
Yep.
At that moment, South Korea was more afraid of us than of North Korea. And so when we think about how we work with our allies, we have to remember these sorts of things. We should never be more coercive on our allies than the adversaries. And so this NPR sort of lays out, I think, a mechanism in which we empower them and we assure them and in the different areas. And for those who are non-proliferation supporters, they should feel comforted by that. There you go. Go ahead.
Let me ask a question that one of our attendees, Doug Ward, asked, and he says, given the national security strategy focus on the Western Hemisphere, I'm curious how your proposal would enhance regional security, particularly in Latin America.
Kirk, why don't you take that one since you're the shared regional guy?
Well, one of the things that we talk about within the idea of regional shared deterrence is a tailored approach. Okay, bringing allies on board, having forces. Now, sharing the hemisphere with our Latin American friends and not friends gives us an advantage in geography of being able to be more responsive from the continental United States. But traditionally in Latin America, we've done things like discourage the Brazilians and the Argentinians from pursuing maritime nuclear power, which could be converted into a weapons program. So we've really, have deterred allies, neutral parties, whatever you want to call them in Latin America, from becoming full members in the club. We are certainly taking notice of some of what the Chinese are doing in the hemisphere that could go down that road and trying to deter them from participating in the hemisphere. They sent a hospital ship to the western coast of Latin America. I was waiting for them to try and send the military hospital ships through the Panama Canal to come into the Caribbean with our carrier battle group. But anyways, probably, I guess, to cut to the chase, the Latin America is one place where conventional deterrence and diplomatic and economic aspects of deterrence and national power are sufficient to get the job done and are what we generally rely on in that respect. So not every problem is a nail. We've got other tools besides a hammer. And in Latin America, we use those other tools.
Let me ask a question, if I might. So we got 10 minutes left. I have 3 questions. First for Kirk. What should we do in enhancing our theater nuclear weapons in the Pacific. We talked about this before we came on live, but I think given the fact we have 0 in the Pacific, that was a subject of a conference I attended and spoke at yesterday with Ellie Gold of the Gold Institute. We had a whole delegation of Koreans here in Washington talking about extended deterrence and how the alliance is critical to the security of the area. That's number one. Number two, either of you can take, many people have suggested, well, we don't need more nuclear weapons. We just need to enhance our conventional capability. And the third one is a little more theoretical, but it's often said by the abolition folks, nuclear weapons are good for deterrence, but not for warfighting. And I've always taken that as, well, you mean you can't use them? But if you can't use them, isn't it just bluff? Maybe I'm misinterpreting what they mean by warfighting, but if you take a nuclear warhead and you lob it at Moscow, I think Putin will think you're fighting. I don't think he'll mistake this for anything else. So those are the three issues. Is one, what should we do in the Pacific with respect to non-strategic nuclear weapons? Number two, why not just increase our conventional forces? And three, what is meant by people in the abolition community who say nuclear weapons are good for deterrence, but not for warfighting?
Well, let me start with the Pacific region, because I think effectively what we're trying to do is replicate what we do with NATO. So there's a lot of levers that we can pull there. But the other piece that we're advocating for, again, is having the allies contribute more according to their core competencies. So we've got AUKUS going on with the UK and Australia. I've advocated for the Australians and the Brits each having 2 squadrons of B-21s, which give us a dual capable deterrent, either conventional or nuclear, in the region without us having to pay the bill of constant deployments, which affect the readiness of our bomber resources. So B-21s in the Pacific, I think, are an important aspect of that. So you combine having B-21s in Australia with the ability to put B-21s on either Guam or Diego Garcia for conventional deterrent, or respond from the United States in a nuclear scenario. In Northeast Asia, I think there's a lot of different things that could be done. Some of them harder to do than others, but long-range strike, F-35 DCA on the peninsula are 2 relatively easy things to do. But it also highlights that our allies sometimes can contribute things that we don't have as core competencies anymore. The Koreans maintain an intermediate range ballistic missile capability in the Hunmu-2. I think we need to look at dual capable capabilities in ballistic and cruise missiles as well that can be forward deployed there. Resurrecting TLAM-N. And again, a lot of times it's just demonstrating the capability. We could use a Slickum type cruise missile, nuclear capable, off attack submarines, which our allies also have, off of surface vessels, which our allies also have. But that doesn't mean there have to be nuclear weapons on them day to day. It just means that you have to create the fear in the enemy's mind that you could deploy the weapon systems that way. And by doing that, you complicate their risk calculus and you complicate their targeting calculus. I think we need to spread the pieces on the board more widely and give our adversaries a much more difficult problem to solve.
Curtis, you have anything you want to add to that?
No, that is ditto on all of that. I would like to take on the conventional forces question, I suppose.
Please.
So why not just have more conventional forces? We've thought about this a lot. First of all, the nuclear forces, shockingly to some of our viewers and participants here, are cheaper. The conventional, if we're only spending 6 to 7% of our DoD budget on the nukes, what is the rest of it being spent on? After you take the people costs, it's conventional arms. It's the stuff we fight wars with. rather than to deter with. Arming for deterrence is a little bit different than arming for defense or war. And so we're sort of advocating maybe between the lines here that we should relook at that philosophy. Much of our adversarial's nuclear buildup is an attempt to asymmetrically counter the conventional prowess of the American armed forces. I mean, we're just since Gulf War 1991, the world knows that the best way to deal with the United States is to have a nuclear weapon, because you can't take us on and win conventionally. Adversaries fear our conventional arsenal, rightly or wrongly, and view it as a much more usable capability. They don't fear our nuclear arsenal. I mean, they respect it enough that the deterrence holds, but it's not what drives why they're nuking up, in my opinion. And so when we look at this, that is what matters. Conventional arms don't deliver the same kind of fear factor that a nuclear weapon does, and our adversaries have written their doctrine basically to warn the world that it doesn't matter what you use on our target. It's the target that is going to draw the nuclear response from the adversary. In other words, you can't JASM your way out of a nuclear war. If you're attacking the things that matter to them most and they feel a nuclear response is appropriate, they will respond. And then the question will fall on us. And I know Kirk has a great thing to consider on this, especially on the escalation cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that conventional deterrence is destabilizing. Okay. Yes. Putin came out in 2008 and said, hey, you attack my strategic forces with conventional weapons, I will respond with nuclear weapons. He came out and said, you try and keep me from pursuing my national objectives in the near abroad, I will nuke air bases in European countries. He's been very clear. I mean, if nothing else, Putin is pretty good at communicating exactly what he's thinking. They write about it, they tell you it, we ignore it, we misinterpret it, we choose not to believe it. We get it wrong constantly. I call it the Cartwright-Gottmuller syndrome. All right. We don't want more usable weapons as a deterrent, because then you will use them. We have caused the Russians to adopt the NATO strategy from Cold War as far as nuclear deterrence of conventional capability. And we refuse to understand that. Our inability to get our mind around what our own strategy is doing is our biggest liability.
Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir, because we have a couple minutes left.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm not going to ask any more questions. We're up against the hour, but I think we got from this article what we wanted, and from the seminar what we wanted, which is to get the conversation started, finding out where the right place to do the right thing is. It's not a perfect document, but it certainly is a starting point to look at a way to build a strong nuclear deterrent. I want to give out a special thank you to Curtis McGiffin and Kirk Fansher for putting pen to paper on this, sharing their expertise, and also thank all those that helped in writing this. This wasn't just a singular effort or even a two-person effort. A lot of people got involved in this, and we got valuable thoughts and insights on future nuclear deterrents aimed at maintaining peace and prosperity. So thank you for educating and engaging with us on this important conversation. If you're new to the NIDS, we're a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to advancing peace and promoting stability through a strong national security and nuclear deterrent. We do this by offering a wide range of deterrence education, from live and virtual events like this and to podcast publications, workshops. We do courses. We do all kinds of stuff. And so we hope that you and your colleagues will engage us a little bit more. I hope to see you next Friday on the 19th with Dave Hoagland, a strategic perspective on nuclear modernization. We have a full lineup of events and speakers on Friday morning, so be sure and you and your colleagues come and check us out at NIDS at thingsdeterrence.com. And thank you for being a part of our growing community. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and share our content with your network, your friends, your neighbors, everyone you know, and spread the word. We hope you have a peaceful day. Oh, I failed to mention. Thank you, Peter. This is your seminar, and I'm glad you're with us and making this happen. So we hope you have a peaceful day and very happy holidays. Thank you very much.
Thank you
all.
Have
a good day.
And thank you, Kirk, and thank you, Curtis, for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.